My name is Vladislav Solovjov. I'm an art director and a creative director based in London, UK. Thanks a lot to Maxon for having me on board. It's my pleasure to present today. And I will be talking about After Effects and fast compositing in this amazing software. I will share some of the quick tips I use in production and how you can achieve a cinematic look in After Effects with standard tools as well as Red Giant plugins. Alright, so let's dive into After Effects. So this is one of the scenes from my personal art projects, sci-fi short film called Researcher Prologue. That was the project I released back in 2020, and today I would like to show you two scenes from that film. So the first one is this London scene when the spaceship came from space and was landing and going underground. So this is one of the sequences. This is what it looks like with all the compositing applied. So we have some ashes, particles flying in the air, we have some glow effect applied, color correction, we have different effects applied on top. I had some denoising here. So I will try to cover all of that. So first of all, I would like to show you what it looks like in the beginning. So before I started compositing anything in After Effects, I had this sequence rendered in Cinema 4D and Redshift. And this is the view it has. It looks a bit flat. We don't have the haze and fog effect. We don't have all the smoke, particles. So what I want to do is just to enhance the look inside After Effects, doing some compositing. Alright, so what I will be doing, I'll be just switching on all of these layers one by one to better visualize and show how it all looks, to make difference. Alright, we'll start from the vignette. So what's this vignette and how I do that? Instead of using any plugins, I decided to brute force it and do it manually. How I did that? I created a layer. I create a new solid. Let's call it Fade New. And let's make this layer black. Alright, so now we have a new vignette layer, but it's all black. We can't see anything. So what we need to isolate and mask this area if we want to be affected by this vignette. So in my case, I would like to make this area darker. But at the moment, our mask blocks this area, but we want to invert it. In order to do that, we need to jump to our mask 1 and change the mode from add to subtract. And this is what it looks like. Now we just inverted the texture. My apologies, not the texture, the mask. So the next step will be playing with the mask feather. Alright. It looks much better. So we have this area now it's much darker. But we literally killed all the highlights and this shadow looks a bit too uniform and flat. How we can change that and how we can treat that? We can change the mode from normal to either soft light or overlay. I'll be using soft light. Boom. Now it looks much better. So we have the more or less naturally looking shadow, but it's a bit too rough. We can just turn down its opacity from 100% to 75%. So this is what we had after, this is what we had before. And I did that to put more accents on these part of the composition because I wanted to focus more on the shape and the landing bay. The next step, I'll be talking about Z-depth pass. Z-depth pass is very useful, especially when you need to do some magic in post-production. In my case, I want to bring some haze, aerial perspective, fog, and also compose smoke. I'll be talking about this in a second. First of all, I would like to tackle what the Z-depth is and how it can get it. When you render a sequence in Cinema 4D with Redshift or like any other render, you can have a beauty pass, or you also can have AOVs. You can use AOVs for compositing. You can render extra layers of reflection, diffuse, shadow, and Z-depth channel. So I used the Z-depth channel to play with some depth in the scene when I need to bring some haze and fog. I decided to use the first layer with soft light mode in order to make this area a bit darker and make the middle ground a bit brighter. But now we have the rocks behind our landing bay. These rocks look a bit too dark. So I decided to duplicate this layer and apply it with screen mode. What you also can do on top, for example, let's imagine you have your Z-depth pass, but you don't want it to be too bright. What you can do is just to apply the mask and just mask it as we did with the vignette layer. And if I put it all together, this is what we have. If I don't mask it, it looks a bit too bright, overexposed, and I just literally turn it down and I can isolate this area. You also can use the Bezier curves to define the look of your scene and compositing. Alright, I'm going to activate all these layers. So this is what it looks like. The next step will be applying the ashes particles. To create this effect, I used Trapcord Form. It's a very useful plugin in After Effects. You can create different particle simulations. You can create particles for floating in space. This is what I did. I created a box grid base form of my particle grid. I use box grid, and this is where you can adjust the number of particles. You can make this number lower. You can turn it up, turn it down if you want to have more particles or less. It's very easy to control. I'll just zoom in. I'll show you. As you can see, these particles don't look like spheres. How we can do that? We can change the particle type in the section particle from sphere to cloudlet. If I make it sphere, the particles will look a bit more rounded. But I want the particles to look more like flakes. So I changed the mode from sphere to cloudlet. It made them a bit bigger. But I also created the second layer of particles and make them a bit smaller. So now if I zoom in, it might be not very clear, but you can see here we have bigger particles and we have a smaller layer of particles. This is how we can bring a bit more variation in our composition. Alright, we activate all of that. You can see that we have bigger chunks of particles and smaller. Alrighty, so this is how we did that. And the next step I want to talk about, I will also activate this layer of Z-depth. This is what I had in my composition, but it's too bright. As you can see, you always can play around, so you can be creative. You can tweak it as much as you want. Alright, the next layer will be denoiser. Denoiser is very helpful when you need to treat the render noise. All this grain you might have in your render. And this is very helpful because you can denoise your composition, your sequences, and you can retain the details. For example, if I jump to my second scene, I think the second scene will be even a better example of the denoising process. So here we have my ship I rendered in Cinema 4D. All right. And if I disable the denoiser layer, you'll see all this grain happening in this area. We have like metallic textures, we have diffuse channel, specular channel, and also roughness. So like metal looks like metal, but we still have this not very good looking noise. How we can treat that? We can apply the denoiser. We literally denoise this area, but we still retain the details of our metal elements, metallic elements. And in our denoiser, we have two settings. We have denoise and we have sharpen. The sharpen apparently makes the picture look a bit sharper after a denoising process. So this is what it looks like without the sharpen. And sharpen literally cranks up the clarity of the picture, so you can make it look sharper. Apologies, yeah, I know it sounds funny, but it works. It really works. I really like it because you can also define the noise level. You can retain all the details from your noise. You can denoise it completely, but in some cases it can smooth all other elements of your render, like small details. So I decided to, instead of using the full mode potential of noise reduction, instead of 100 I went to 50, and this is what we achieved. So which is pretty good. It helps, not in all the cases, let's be honest, but in that case it worked quite well. All right, I would like to get back to this first scene. I just explained to you how I use denoiser, and let me introduce you how I compose the smoke. In order to compose smoke elements, I used our Z-depth channel we literally just mentioned a few minutes ago. So I use the Z-depth channel in order to place our smoke in space. We can put it closer, we can put it further from the camera, and how we do that, you can use either curves or levels in After Effects. I always use curves. It's very, I don't know, in my opinion, it looks a bit more intuitive. It's easier to control everything because instead of having all different bars of information, you have literally 2 points you can tweak, move, and place your smoke in space. So it's pretty useful. And what I did next, I just copy and pasted the existed layer and played with the timing of each simulation. It can be a footage, it can be a simulation. Sometimes I render something in Cinema 4D. I can simulate smoke and render it as a black and white sequence and use it later in compositing. But in that case, I decided to use footage instead. Footage is very nice and useful because if you have your own library, you can use it in production. Sometimes it can save time, and it's pretty handy to have all these footages because sometimes you don't even need to render, so you not only have you can save time, but also you can save your efforts. It's pretty useful. The next thing I decided to bring the glow. I used the Red Giant Universe glow. When we start using this plugin, you'll see quite a few settings here. You can adjust the size of it, you can make the glow bigger, you can make it smaller, you can adjust the threshold from 100 to 60, intensity, so you can make it brighter, but it's too bright as you can see. So we turn it down, and also we bring the threshold back to 75, so it's not too bright. and it affects only the highlights. So I'll put it on level of 85. Yeah, it looks pretty neat, but we still have this area affected by our glow. So in order to avoid that, we can bring the threshold to 100, and now we have the glow only around the highlights. Next step, I decided to use the lens flare. In this scene, lens flare is not that obvious. It's more like God ray going from the sky, from the clouds, and hits this area of the composition. I think I will present the lens flare in these compositions instead. So I activate the lens flare. It takes time to get processed. So here I have the like a huge spotlights or area lights. And we have a very strong light coming from the ceiling, and I wanted to get this bloom effect. So we also can make these lens flare look more artistic. And how we can do that, we can jump into the designer of the real lens flare, and here we can see like different presets. You can have your pre-made presets, you can use the pre-existing presets. There are quite a few settings. Honestly, I really like using standard presets and then adjusting them for my personal needs. I don't remember which one I use. I think I used the original, this one, but I decided to go further and tweak each of these elements. So you can have this halo, you can have the streak lights, you can have the chromatic aberrations, you can enable it or disable it, you can change the hue and saturation of your elements. Make it brighter, we can change the color. It's pretty useful. In my case, the light was a bit bluish in the scene, so I changed the color of the main halo and glow from orange to blue. Then we just hit confirm. So the project is getting auto-saved, which is very good. Like, you always auto-save your projects. Ctrl S is our friend. You never want to spoil and destroy what you've been working on quite hard. The next thing, I just duplicated that layer and wanted to bring some halo, some glow around the turbines of my engines. It was pretty simple. I also adjusted one of the presets. It was Helios, but I wanted to keep this lens flare quite clear, so I deleted all other textures and left only this glow. I added some red glow to have this red halo inside around this source of light, in order to match the color of the emission coming from the engines. And I duplicated that layer one more time and put it on top of the right engine. So this is what it looks like. Alright, so I just covered the lens flares. So here it was a bit more subtle, but in the second scene it was a bit more obvious. That's why I wanted to switch to another scene. Chromatic aberrations. Alrighty, this is probably one of the most used effects in game trailers, in CG films, also in cinema or in motion design. What's the chromatic aberration? Chromatic aberration, if I turn it down to switch it off, you'll see it creates this color shift along the sides of our composition. It's basically the lens distortion, and because of this lens distortion you have the color shift. This red and blue channels, they shift and distort it along the edges of our CG lens. We can change the radius, we can change the chromatic tint, we can make it brighter, we can make it more colorful, we can change the saturation, we can change the amount of passes, so it looks a bit sharper, but I decided to bring a bit more passes, and the transition became much smoother. Alright, this is the chromatic aberrations. You can also create inside After Effects with Ridge Universe chromatic aberration. It's very useful. I always use it in my production. You just drop it on top of the composition and everything looks better. And also it helps to smooth some of the render imperfections. For example, here I had this ground, but it looks, you could see this bump texture. It didn't look too good, so I decided also to use this chromatic aberration to smooth the render imperfections, so you can hide some of your bump textures and other elements of your render and hide it behind the aberrations. So the picture looks cool, and also you can treat some of the like flaws of your render. And the final step will be color grading. Color grading is like the final touch you can put on top. So here what I had the magic bullet film. Let's start from that. So here, when we put this effect on top, Ridge and Magic Bullet Look film, we have different negative stocks, and you can choose between different presets. You can literally imitate the look of the real film, and depending on what result you want to achieve, you can choose between different options. So I think I'll stick around with codec 5218. This is very good. It has this sandy sepia look I wanted to get for this particular scene in After Effects. You can also change the temperature, you can make it warmer, you can make it brighter. I think we also can make it a little bit warmer. So let's increase the color temperature from 0 to 10. Alright, I'm happy with the settings, but as I said, you always can play around, tweak different settings. You can play around with adjustments and see how it goes, because it always depends on your scene and what you have on your mind. The second step will be playing around with Magic Bullet Looks. It's an ultimate weapon for color grading. It's very useful. It's a very powerful tool when you want to achieve quick color grading in After Effects. So what we have here, we have curves, we have pop. Oh, by the way, pop is very useful tool inside Magic Bullet Looks, because it literally helps to pop your picture, the image. So you can crank it up and bring the details, more details. So it plays. I think it works as an unsharp mask plugin in After Effects. It's a standard tool, but this is what you also can get in Magic Bullet Looks. But it looks much better. I don't know why, but here I use pop instead of unsharp mask, because the result is much more pleasant. You can change the size of it. It creates this feel of the HDR look from like a real camera or something you can get in color grading in Photoshop. But we can get that for our animated sequences. So I think I turned it down to 55. All right, looks all right. So also I applied duotone. Duotone is like teal orange. So basically you can tweak the shadows and highlights. And this is very useful because you can have a uniform color gradient on top of your like other tools like curves, levels, film negative. It feels pretty filmic and cinematic. I think I will turn the highlights a bit to this level, a bit yellowish, but I want the colors to be a bit warmer. And the shadows, I think I'll light blue color. That's what I need. What we have here, we also have lens vignette. It's the additional level of vignette you can add on top. I just wanted to darken this area a bit more. That's why I added this vignette. And what's the most interesting here, I think I'll just delete these two layers. It's halation. Halation is something we can see in films everywhere, like in Marvel movies, in like all modern CGI. What is halation? Halation is when the rays of light hits your camera's lens, and it creates these like color distortion around the shapes of objects, especially around the edges, and also highlights. I'll make it brighter, so to make the difference. So that's what I mean. You can create this paper thin color distortion red along the edges, and also if I zoom in, you'll see it. So the size, this is the setting I usually play with. In this case, I think I'll just leave it as is. I think 35, and the amount 100. And also, you can add another layer on top and change the size and the scale of it. You can make it slightly brighter. So let's say the size will be 75 and amount not 85. We can turn it down to 20. I think 35 will be good. Alright, and now we have this interesting looking effects along the edges. And this is it. This is how I do color grading in After Effects. You also can see that there are plenty of other options. You can have Colorista for weight color, for example. What Colorista is, it's a very powerful tool where you can adjust the shadows, midtones, and highlights. So all these effects come as one package inside one plugin. So you don't need to jump between different plugins. It all can happen within Magic Bullet Looks. So let's say I want the shadows a bit darker. I want to bring more exposure and the contrast. Alright, so if I click OK, this is what we have now. But this corner looks a bit too black, a bit too dark. So what I can do, I can get back to my vignette and slightly adjust it. Alrighty. So this is the final result inside After Effects. This is what you can do fairly quickly, but I just wanted to dive into details and explain everything. And the last thing I think I will tackle is heat distortion. Heat distortion, it's a very useful tool from Red Giant as well. Universe Heat Wave. This is what it is. It creates this optic illusion, like the illusion we can see in camera or in real life, like on top of the hot objects. Like you have a flame, and it emits not only light and heat. And this distortion we can see in air. This is what the heat wave is. So here we can change the heat intensity. I don't have much time to explain all the features of this plugin, but I'll just tackle the most important. The most important things you need to pay attention to is heat intensity, blur amount, and flow speed. Because when your animation will be playing, you'll see that it might be very speedy, and you might want to turn this speed down from, let's say, 75 to 20. So it doesn't glitter too much, because it may look a bit too distracting. So in my case, I want to use heat intensity on the level of 2, and this is it. This is how I did compositing in this scene. I also had smoke elements in the space across the bay. I had lens flares placed in these corners. I have the master lens flare, and I also had the extra layer of Z-depth channel applied on top, but with a mask, because without a mask it would be too bright. So I wanted to isolate the Z-depth channel, so this haze would be placed along the flooring. But now when I look at it, it looks a bit too bright, so I think I'll just turn it down to 40% the opacity. So that this is 100% and this is 40. 40 looks pleasing. And this is what it looks like with all the layers of color correction. This one looks a bit too dark, so I think I'll just disable the colorista. Colorista is something I just touch based in Magic Bullet Looks, but you can have it separately. Sometimes I also use colorista, but I personally prefer to keep everything inside the Magic Bullet Looks. It's just easier to control everything when it all is in one place. So thank you very much for joining and watching. Thanks for your time, for your consideration. So once again, my name is Vladislav Solovjov. I'm an art director, creative director. These are my credentials, my Instagram, Behance, and website. Please hit me up if you have any questions, or you can follow me. Thank you very much for coming. Thanks to Maxon for having me, and see you soon. Bye bye.